Hello everybody, so I'm going to start with the face and oral cavity development for embryology, and I'm going to go through my notes basically off of the PowerPoint, so your notes, you should be able to follow along on what we did in class. So I'm going to start with where we start. So you have sperm and an egg meet and you get a zygote, and then the zygote is going to become an embryo. And we grow in that cephalocaudal direction, which forms this tube, which, like we learned, is the mouth end and then the butt. And we come from three embryonic layers: the ectoderm, mesoderm, and the endoderm. Ectoderm, like we learned, it makes enamel, skin, brain, and the spinal cord. So E, ectoderm, E, enamel. Mesoderm, think of the middle, so it makes the things in the middle, so the dentin, pulp, cementum, bone, and muscles. And then endoderm is just a lining, so it's lining of the digestive system and lungs. Okay, moving on. So starting at 3 weeks in embryo, that tube that we came from has the buccopharyngeal membrane appear, or the oropharyngeal membrane. They're the same thing, just two names. It appears and then it ruptures. And when it ruptures, we get Rathke's pouch. Rathke's pouch is where the pituitary gland comes from. And then as it ruptures, we also get the stoidenum, which is the primitive mouth. So this is how we start with our mouth. The pituitary gland begins, and then this will start to drift all the way back to the back of our head. So that's Rathke's pouch. And we also get the frontal process and the 5 brachial arches. Okay, so that comes from the buccopharyngeal membrane rupturing. We get the Rathke's pouch, stoidenum, and the frontal process as well as the 5 brachial arches. Starting with the frontal process. Let's look at it first. The frontal process comes with the placodes, which are sense organs, just the beginning of our eyes, nose, and ears. So the lens are our eyes, the optic, think of like auditory, ears, and nasal, just the nose. Then we also get the forehead, the nose, and the globular process, which is the philtrum and the premaxillary area. So the frontal process, you want to think of it coming up. We get our forehead, and we just move down the face. So you get beginnings of your eyes, there's like little nubs, ears, little nubs, nose, you get the sides, the lateral part, left and right, the middle of the nose, and then the tip of the nose. And then the globular process, which is part of this, is the philtrum here, and then the premaxillary area of the palate. So basically, just behind your front teeth, just the premaxillary area, and I'll show you that later. So that's the frontal process. In our books on figure 4.5, as well as the workbook that we use, I think this image just helps just to show how it starts here, and then we just start to grow. So this whole process, we're growing, and that's why it's like different stages and just ways to think of, just you're starting with the frontal process, and then each arch is just adding to it, so we're getting more. So with the brachial arches, the first brachial arch is formed from Meckel's cartilage. It forms the maxillary process and the mandibular process. The maxillary process makes the maxilla, the upper side of the lip, just these parts, because the philtrum is with the globular process of the frontal process. So the upper sides of the lips, the upper cheeks, the palate, and the anterior part of our tongue. The mandibular process becomes the mandible, the lower cheeks, the lower lip, the whole lower lip, and then our muscles that are here. So that is the whole first brachial arch. So again, we're moving down the face from the frontal process, and as that's formed, then we're going to start getting the next part of our face, the maxillary and the mandible. First, brachial arch. Second brachial arch is formed from Reichardt's cartilage. and it forms the base of the tongue, which is called the copula, and it begins the hyoid bone. So again, we're moving down, so now we're about back here, and we're getting the base of the tongue, which is, way back there. We can't even see it if you were to open your mouth. And the beginning of the hyoid bone, which we're also learning in head and neck anatomy. It's that suspended bone that isn't connected to any other bone, just muscles hold it up, so back in here. And then we get our third brachial arch, and that forms as the tongue begins to fuse together, because we already had the anterior part of the tongue and the posterior part of the tongue, so they have to meet. So that happens when the third brachial arch appears. And so the tongue grows together, and as that grows together, you get the cecum foramen. You can just see it, and that is the future thyroid gland. Then the hyoid bone, which is down here, is completed, and this forms the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is cranial nerve 9, and that is the nerve that allows us to taste and swallow, which makes sense because it's back here, going with the tongue, going with our throat, so cranial nerve 9. And then the fourth and fifth brachial arches, they finish the thyroid, the parathyroid, and the thymus glands. So we're just kind of moving down, like I said. And these include the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10, and that allows for digestion and heart rate control. So those are the 5 brachial arches with the frontal process. So recap, we just move down the face with the frontal process. That includes the forehead, beginnings of the eyes, beginnings of the ears, beginnings of the nose, which includes the globular process, which has the philtrum, and the premaxillary area of the mouth. First brachial arch, upper parts of the cheeks, upper part of the lip, maxilla, palate. Let me double check, I believe that is everything. And then the mandibular process, in the maxillary process, part of the anterior part of the tongue. Mandibular process, mandible, cheeks, lip, the muscles, and then you get to the third, which has the finished part of the tongue, the second, the base of the tongue, the cartilage, and beginning of the hyoid bone, into the third, just moving on down. Okay, so as we have those growing, then all our tissues need to start to fuse together. Fusion of the tissues. At 8 weeks, you should have the soft tissues would have been fused together. Soft tissues are like our skin, so that's how a cleft lip would be shown if they haven't all fused together. And then by 12 weeks, we should have all the bony sutures, bony structures should have fused together like a cleft palate, because that's bone. So to get deeper into a cleft lip, the specifics of a cleft lip would be, I'm going to read this exactly, failure of the philtrum of the globular process of the frontal process to fuse with the upper lip of the maxillary process, fuse with the upper lip of the maxillary process of the first brachial arch. So to break that down, you have the frontal process, which includes the globular process, which includes the philtrum. So that's all part of the frontal process, which should be meeting with the first brachial arch, which includes the maxillary process, which includes the upper lip. So if they don't properly fuse together, you get a cleft lip. It's most common in boys, and it is most common on the left side. So as it comes, if we can get this part fusing, the philtrum, and let's go to the left side of the maxillary process, it wouldn't fuse. So that's cleft lip. Cleft palate, I'll read it exactly. Premaxillary area of globular process of frontal process did not fuse with right and left palatal shelves of maxillary process of the first brachial arch. So to break that down, you have the frontal process, which includes the globular process, which includes the premaxillary area of the palate. And that should fuse with the first brachial arch, which includes the maxillary process, includes the palate, which includes the right and left shelves of the palate. So that's just going from one and then really zooming in onto what all that includes. It's most common in girls. To show a cleft palate, I broke that one down a little bit better. So you have the premaxillary area, which is of the frontal process, which is of the globular process, premaxillary area. That should fuse with the left and right sides of the palate, which is part of the first brachial arch of the maxillary process. So like your hard palate up there, the left and right sides that come together, and they should all three fuse together. But if they go to fuse together and they leave that hole, that's a cleft. So they did not properly fuse, which left you a hole. So that's how I take the development. I hope that helped. I can try to explain it another way. Just let me know if you need me to.